Deputy Rory O'Murgo is stepping in for Deputy Devine. I'm delighted to open the 14th public meeting of the Joint Committee, our second session on treatment, recovery and rehabilitation, and I want to welcome our witnesses today. From Merchants Quay, Ireland, Ms Niamh McGuinness, Deputy Head of Operations, Prison and Regional Addiction Services. Mr Carl Duquat, Treatment and Recovery Programme Coordinator. From Spéire, Mr Damien Quinn, the founder, and from the Peter McVerry Trust, Ms Noelle Woods, Director of Nursing, Addiction, IPAS and Housing Force Services, and Ms Stephanie Kirwan, Head of Services, Health, Mental Health and Standards. You're all very welcome to our committee today. Before I begin, I want to remind witnesses and members of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable or otherwise engaging in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It is imperative that you comply with any such request. I'd also like to remind members of the constitutional requirements that in order to participate in public meetings, members must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex. Members of the committee attending remotely must do so from within the precincts of Leinster House. This is due to the constitutional requirement that in order to participate in public meetings, members must be physically present within the confines of the place where Parliament has chosen to sit. In that regard, I would ask any members partaking via Microsoft Teams that prior to making their contribution to the meeting that you confirm that you are on the grounds of the Leinster House campus. All opening statements have been circulated to members and will be published on the Oireachtas website after the session. As agreed, opening statements will be limited to 5 minutes each to allow time for questions and answers. I'm conscious of the wide range of issues to be discussed today. If necessary, further or more detailed information can be sent to the clerk for circulation to members. I should also mention that members will be in and out of the committee depending on their dollar channel requirements in the chamber, so please read nothing more into that. So in terms of our opening statements, I would like to invite Ms Niamh McGuinness to deliver your opening statement first. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to speak on this important issue. As you said, my name is Niamh McGuinness, Deputy Head of Operations with Merchants Quay, Ireland. Merchants Quay have been delivering addiction services in the Irish prison service for more than 15 years. The relationship between the voluntary service, Merchants Quay, and the statutory IPAS services is going from strength to strength, as both recognise the indisputable need for enhanced addiction and mental health treatment services across the 13 prisons in Ireland. It has been well covered in the media recently that the Irish prison population has surged, exceeding 122% capacity in many regions. That's 134% in Mountjoy. As of January 21st, there was 5,747 people in custody, 600 of those on mattresses. Although overcrowding is extremely problematic for both the people in prison and those working there, the true crisis is the unaddressed trauma, mental health challenges and addiction that drives the revolving door. Research consistently indicates that approximately 70% of people entering the prison system arrive with an active substance use disorder or have received a custodial sentence for a crime directly related to their addiction. Despite these overwhelming numbers, not everyone gets to avail of the addiction services while serving their sentences. This can be because of long waiting lists, exacerbated by both staffing issues and a shortage of physical spaces available to see people. Expecting people to just will their way out of addiction through punishment without treatment is a recipe for failure. Evidence shows that when we integrate rehabilitation into the prison environment and promote the possibility of recovery, the results can be transformative. Merchants Quay, in collaboration with our colleagues in IPAS Care and Rehabilitation, are currently working to diversify the services provided to those individuals in prison impacted by addiction and mental health. One-to-one addiction psychotherapy is not enough on its own, so we are currently developing psychoeducational groups, case management, prison recovery education, recovery coaching, and the treatment and rehabilitation programme known as TARP, which my colleague will present on in a moment, are all proven to support people to stabilise their lives and prepare for recovery after prison. The benefits of these interventions extend well beyond the individual. Successful prison-based treatment is a win for the families, the community, wider society. Reduced recidivism benefits the judicial system, and the economic benefit is undeniable. Access to people and access to spaces to provide these services is an ongoing challenge. Currently, we deliver an evidence-based treatment programme, TARP, from a dedicated and secure landing in the Mountjoy campus. There are spaces for 9 men to complete this 8-week programme with 5 cycles ran per year. That equates to just 45 men per year for a prison population exceeding 5,000, and currently there are 0 places for women. While the work to establish alternatives to criminalising people with addiction continues, the need for a dedicated and secure space in each of the prisons to provide treatment programmes is undisputed. If we consider that 70% of 5,000 is about 3,500 people, and even if only half of those chose to avail of treatment, the risk of recidivism would be reduced significantly. Currently, approximately 600 people are engaged in Merchants Quay services across the prison estate, but there's a further 1,200 people remaining on waiting lists. People on remand or those serving short sentences often don't get to access recovery programmes while in custody, and this is really a missed opportunity for all. There has been a welcome increase in budgets this year to respond to addiction and dual diagnosis in Irish prisons. This allows for the development of a health-led approach where the prison healthcare system is interconnected with community-based services via our successful collaboration. The link between addiction and trauma is undeniable and well researched. The research shows that more than 80% of individuals in our prisons have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, with nearly half reporting 4 or more. For these individuals, substance use is rarely about pleasure. It's a desperate attempt at self-medication to numb the pain of early life abuse, neglect, poverty, violence. To truly address mental health and addiction, we must recognise that we're not always dealing with a choice to offend, but very often with survival mechanisms. Furthermore, we must also face a difficult truth that the prison environment itself is a source of secondary trauma. Extreme overcrowding, the constant sensory triggers of clanging gates, violent outbursts and the loss of autonomy do not encourage reflection. They trigger a fight or flight response that deepens the roots of addiction. Re-traumatisation in a prison is practically inevitable. Better access to recovery supports is the only answer. What is needed? The need is clear. When planning to increase prison capacity, a dedicated space in each prison to run trauma-informed treatment and rehabilitation programmes for people to access while in custody, or a dedicated building to provide a national treatment and rehabilitation programme for people in custody is essential. This would help us to break the cycle of the revolving door. It would ensure that a person's sentence becomes an opportunity for healing rather than a period of further decline. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Carl, you're next.
Chair, Deputies and Senators, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Carl Quinn. I'm the coordinator of the Treatment and Rehabilitation Programme, TARP. It is an intensive prison-based addiction treatment programme located in Mountjoy Prison and managed by Merchants Quay, Ireland. TARP is an intensive 8-week structured programme grounded in evidence-based therapeutic principles. Participants are accommodated on the medical unit in Mountjoy Prison and are physically separated from the general prison population. This arrangement creates what we like to call a sterile environment, designed to reduce exposure to drugs, intimidation and prison subculture, and to enable participants to engage meaningfully with treatment. The programme operates 5 cycles per year with 9 participants per cycle, allowing the treatment and rehabilitation programme to work with 45 men annually. Participants engage in daily psychoeducational group work and structured therapeutic interventions supported by individual care plans with the aim of preparing them for progression into further treatment and residential rehabilitation where appropriate. TARP has recently undergone a formal evaluation and Merchants Quay Ireland is actively implementing the recommendations arising from the process. These developments include strengthening prison programme structure, enhancing therapeutic content and improving progression planning and continuity of care. This reflects a commitment by Merchants Quay Ireland to continuously improve and to aligning prison-based treatment with best international practice. In the longer term, TARP has a strategic goal of developing a fully embedded therapeutic community within the prison setting. The intention is to move beyond a time-limited intervention model towards a more comprehensive, rehabilitative environment that supports and sustained behavioural change, pro-social identity development and recovery-orientated living within custody. The majority of people leaving TARP are well equipped to move forward. Men who are given the opportunity to complete treatment while in prison often finish successfully, develop a more positive mindset and gain access to community services. These supports significantly increase their chances of achieving recovery and maintaining a positive outcome. Despite the impact, TARP operates within a context of sustainable unmet needs. Research consistently demonstrates that approximately 70% of people in custody experience addiction issues. With over 5,000 men currently in custody nationally, this suggests that approximately 3,500 individuals require addiction-specific interventions. Against the backdrop, the treatment and rehabilitation programme capacity to treat 45 men per year highlights a significant gap between need and provision. It is also important to note that there is currently no equivalent treatment and rehabilitation programme available within the women's prison estate, despite evidence that women in custody present with particularly high levels of addiction, trauma and complex need. This represents a critical gap in service provision. Merchants Quay Ireland currently have 3 addiction counsellors operating on site in Mountjoy Prison, allowing for safe management of approximately 30 clients each at any one time. As a result, many individuals who are motivated to engage in treatment are unable to access timely intervention during this period in custody. While progression into residential treatment is an important objective for the treatment and rehabilitation programme, it is neither realistic. While progression into residential treatment is an important objective for the treatment and rehabilitation programme, it is neither realistic nor feasible to assume this outcome for all participants. Capacity within residential services is limited and community-based treatment services are also significantly under-resourced. This presents a major challenge to continuity of care following release, despite the progress achieved during custody. The effectiveness of therapeutic community models in custodial settings is well established. International research demonstrates that prison-based therapeutic communities significantly reduce substance use, improve institutional behaviour and lower rates of reoffending, particularly when followed by structured aftercare. These outcomes are achieved because therapeutic communities address addiction holistically, incorporating responsibility, emotional regulation, social learning, pro-social identity development. TARP reflects these principles within the custodial environment and represents a foundation upon which a broader therapeutic community model could be developed within the prison system. The annual cost of incarcerating one individual is just under €100,000. Continued investment in imprisonment without adequate treatment does little to address the underlying drivers of offending behaviour. In contrast, evidence consistently shows that investment in structured addiction treatment reduces recidivism and develops better long-term outcomes for individuals and communities. In conclusion, if we are serious about reducing reoffending, enhancing public safety and ensuring effective use of public resources, there must be a significant expansion of addiction treatment within the prison system. This includes scaling up the treatment and rehabilitation programme, supporting its development into a therapeutic community model, introducing equivalent provision for women in custody and strengthening community-based treatment services to ensure continuity of care upon release. Investment in treatment and rehabilitation is not a soft option, it is evidence-led, cost-effective response that benefits individuals, families and society as a whole. The treatment and rehabilitation programme demonstrates what can be achieved within evidence-based interventions are properly resourced, and the cost of inaction, both in human and economic terms, is far too high to ignore. I thank the committee for its attention and welcome any questions.
Well, thank you so much for your contribution. Damien, you're up next.
Members, colleagues, thanks for the invitation. I would like to begin with an uncomfortable truth. The majority of people caught up in our justice system are people who use drugs. Addiction and incarceration are not separate policy areas. They are deeply intertwined. And our current approach to both is failing. 61% of people released from Irish prisons reoffend in 3 years. For under 21s, it's 84%. We spend $99,000 per year per person on incarceration in adult prisons. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice is planning 1,500 new spaces. But here's what decades of evidence tells us. You cannot police your way out of a drug problem. We have fought a war on drugs for generations, and we lose that war daily. And this comes from a man that was on the wrong side of that war for many years. More enforcement, more prison beds, more of the same will not deliver the same results. Ask 10 people in the justice system what rehabilitation means, and you'll get 10 different answers, or none at all. A learned friend and a member of our Spéire network quite rightly pointed out that there is no agreed national definition, no consistent framework, no clear pathway from addiction and offending to recovery and contribution. If we cannot unilaterally define what rehabilitation is, we cannot say we are working towards it. I'm not alone in saying this. The Department of Health's own stakeholder consultation, 241 participants feeding into the next national drug strategy, identified the same gap. They called explicitly for a clear definition of recovery to be included in the new strategy. They noted that the current strategy language is not accessible and top-down in nature. The criminologist Elliot Curry calls most of what passes for rehabilitation as conformist intervention, programs that teach people to accept their place, make better choices, take personal responsibility. But conformist intervention locates the problem entirely in the individual, while ignoring the systematic forces that shape them. It doesn't inspire, it doesn't transform, and it doesn't work, not reliably, for the most part anyways. I know this because I live it. Years in the system told the problem was me. What nobody acknowledged was the community that I came from, the background and start in life that I got, systematically deprived of opportunity, and where the pathway to prison was clearer than any pathway to purpose. Curry proposes transformative intervention, not fitting people into a broken system, but engaging them in changing the conditions that damage them. It rests on 3 principles: consciousness, understanding that your troubles have causes outside yourself. It's no accident that our prisons are filled with people from certain air codes and with no fixed abode. Solidarity, recognising that collective action, not competition, is the path forward. The person beside you in recovery is your ally, not your enemy. Hope, not blind optimism, but the conviction that your efforts matter, that change is possible. That's what we deliver in Spéire. Our 7-pillar disclosure model helps people demonstrate with evidence their commitment to change. Our peer mentors with lived experience support others through transformation. Our work is now embedded in national policy, the Department of Justice Building Pathways Together Strategy, Action 1.6, which formally includes our certificates of commitment to change. The stakeholder consultation echoed this need, calling for more support for individuals with lived experience in both strategy planning and implementation, and noting the critical shortage of post-residential services and recovery housing. We don't need to invent solutions. We need to resource the ones that exist. The Department of Justice is investing in future prison capacity. I want to propose a radical but practical alternative. We have opportunities across multiple departments: justice, housing, health, enterprise, and the DRCDG. The consultation itself called for a stronger linkage between these departments and local services, alongside existing prison retrofitting training programs. People in prison could be involved in building their own step-down recovery units rather than more prison cells. Step-down units where recovery and abstinence and support of each other are the values, where people transition from custody to community with purpose, skills and support. This is not soft justice, it's smart justice. It builds capacity, teaches trades, and creates the infrastructure for genuine rehabilitation. I also say this begrudgingly, but honestly, I believe legislation deserves serious consideration. Not because drugs are harmless, I've seen the devastation and been personally devastated by that too, but because criminalisation has failed. We have policed this problem for decades and the problem has only grown. Prohibition enriches criminals and marginalises people who need health support, not handcuffs. The stakeholder consultation noted that a very small number of participants argued for the legalisation of cannabis. I was one of those voices, but with a firm condition. Legislation must come with accountability. All tax revenues generated must be explicitly ring-fenced for health and education, not absorbed into general expenditure, directly specified towards treatment, recovery services, prevention, and the communities most affected. If we're going to have this conversation, and I believe we must have it honestly. Elliot Curry wrote, "The conformist programs teach that the world don't change for you. You change for the world. Transformative intervention says the opposite. You can and you should change the world. And in the process, you will change yourself. That is what we offer. That is what we have already proven works, and it aligns with what 241 stakeholders have already told the Department of Health. Everybody wins when somebody turns their life around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Ms. Woods, now deliver your opening statement on behalf of the Peter McVerry Trust.
Thank you. Cahirlock, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to speak today. My name is Noelle Woods, Director of Nursing, Addiction, IPAS and Housing First Services at the Peter McVerry Trust. I am joined today by my colleague Stephanie Kirwan, Head of Specialist Support Services. Peter McVerry Trust is a national housing and homeless charity providing trauma-informed, low-threshold addiction and recovery supports alongside Housing First, supported temporary accommodation, family hubs, aftercare and education services. In 2025, we supported more than 12,000 people across our services. Within our addiction services and recovery portfolio, we operate 5 core services: day addiction service, residential community detox and treatment service, residential stabilisation service, drug-free supported housing and aftercare services. All of our addiction services are underpinned by the Seeking Safety model. This evidence-based, present-focused programme was adopted following a sustained review of service outcomes and repeated presentations from people with significant histories of trauma. This evidence-based programme equips participants with practical, safe coping strategies, emphasising present-focused skill development rather than revisiting past traumatic events. International evidence shows that this leads to more stable, sustained recovery outcomes. In 2025, our addiction and recovery services supported 578 unique individuals throughout our day, residential, drug-free housing and aftercare service. The National Drug Strategy represents a progressive shift towards treating drug use as a public health issue. The Government's 2026 commitment of an additional 11 million in funding is strongly welcomed, as is the expanded access to buprenorphine, which supports harm reduction, stabilisation and greater independence for people with long-term opioid dependence. However, critical challenges do remain. Funding structures for NGOs need strengthening. Services require predictable, timely and multi-annual funding to meet rising and complex needs. Drug use affects every town and village. Therefore, every region must have equitable access to treatment. A mix of fixed and mobile outreach supports is essential so that people can access help when and where it is needed. Treatment models must be matched to individual need and not constrained by what happens to be available. People with complex trauma benefit from Seeking Safety, while those with behavioural challenges require a therapeutic approach, often containing a peer component. Personalised care pathways produce far better outcomes. We also welcome the expansion of the naloxone programme, which is saving lives by equipping support workers, peers and family members to respond rapidly to overdose situations both in services and within the wider community. Drug use and addiction cannot be viewed in isolation from the wider social context. For many people, particularly young people, drug use is often linked to undiagnosed or untreated mental health issues. Without integrated mental health supports, meaningful recovery is significantly undermined. We are also increasingly concerned about mothers with young children who are often excluded from current models of treatment. This is often as a result of challenges in securing childcare arrangements for prolonged periods, whereby a mother can access residential treatment services. Expanding day programme options may provide a safe and accessible alternative. However, in the longer term, providing similar opportunities to females must be a consideration on a wider scale in terms of residential treatment, making access more fluid and comfortable. Drug intimidation has become a common theme across our services, whereby those availing of services are doing so because of a want for recovery, while equally being aware of threats that are ongoing towards their families and their homes as a result of drug debts that are ongoing. It is common for debts to accumulate interest, not set but at the discretion of the drug dealer, often whereby families are not in a position to pay debts due to ongoing rise of cost and/or interest. We have seen positive outcomes being generated in relation to community policing in certain pockets of the capital, whereby the presence and engagement of An Garda Síochána is lending to communities feeling more safe and equally supported. Peter McVerry Trust would advocate for an approach of restorative justice to be adapted on a national level to support communities, families and individuals where drug debt has accumulated, to find more humane resolutions to drug debt and safeguard both families and communities. Although our residential community detox and treatment service operates nationally, gaps in the system persist. If, for example, somebody from Kerry completes their programme and is homeless, we don't have the ability to place them in aftercare housing in Dublin. This breaks their recovery pathway at a critical moment. Gaps as such place further strain on already vulnerable individuals who are new to recovery and do not have a stable place to call home, and often may have to avail of homeless services in terms of accommodation. Challenges can and do exist in mainstream homeless services where drug use is an ongoing feature, resulting in individuals who have accessed treatment services being exposed to ongoing substance misuse.
Okay, we just stop there. We're a minute over, if that's okay.
Oh,
no, you're absolutely fine.
sorry.
I promise I'll give you time to catch up during the session. If that's
Perfect,
okay.
that's fine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to open up to questions from our members. Each member has 5 minutes for questions and answers. And Senator Ryan, you're first on the list that was distributed before the session.
Thank you very much, Kirwan, and welcome. And my apologies for being late. I was just in the Shannon Chamber. But I suppose my first question is over to Mr. Quinn. Now, I know a lot about Spéire and I know Damien in like a personal capacity as well. But I suppose, in your opinion, like Spéire, what they do is kind of like a step-down service after, you know, you might come out of prison and you're looking for rehabilitation in terms of getting back into society. But how do you see, like, what can be done in terms of prevention around, I suppose, even getting into the prison system? Like, is there enough being done in that space before we actually get into the prison and then come out of it to use the service? Or how do you see those kind of services at the moment, or what's needed?
Earlier, like, a lot of people come from very disadvantaged areas, like, and if we were to take the public deprivation indices and put it over patterns of offending behaviour, I'd say there'd be a fairly strong match. So I think it's about channeling kind of services and supports and opportunities into those deprived areas, so that people can actually do something for themselves rather than be stuck in a fishbowl with no support and pockets of crime. So with regards to Spéire, like, it's more like a friendship network more than anything else. Like, there's no hierarchies, you know, we're all supportive of each other and we all want to see each other do well. Some really positive stuff that's happened on that front is we've had success with employer partnerships, like, and one in particular took on 85 people for us last year. Some people still serving time in open prisons, like, you know, that's really, really transformative. And if I was to go back to my time when I got out, like, you know, I spent a year really, really floundering, despite having all the education, despite having the space to rehabilitate in prison, despite doing everything right. I went back to an area which was very, very rural and struggled to get on because I had a label that I couldn't get away from. So with regards to kind of what we can do better, I suppose the big thing for me is the secondary punishment piece. You know, like, people go to prison to be punished, and then they're faced with secondary punishment years after prison. That needs to change, like, you know. It's a societal shift that needs to happen with regards to kind of the way people are viewed and the way people are judged. And I think that's the problematic area. But for us, like, we see lots of people, like, just being part of their transformative journey, seeing them get on and move into good positions in life. You know, it's a really, really rewarding thing. And I think, the structure is there. We've a network nationally and across the border as well. And I suppose, as I said earlier, like, you know, the services exist, the friendship exists. Just resource it and let us keep doing it and engage people that have been through these systems a little bit more.
Perfect,
and we'd be a long way on our way.
Thanks, Damien. And I suppose my second question is for Peter McVerry. In terms of, I suppose, supporting people in the homeless service, I've worked in homeless services where I've seen where people sometimes are getting better and making progress. They get nearly moved out of the service and sometimes into a worse off service where they deteriorate. And then you also have services where, and I'm not saying this is what's happening in Peter McVerry, it's just my experience of working in the homeless services. You then have, I suppose, a system where they're sometimes housing people in areas that are inadequate, rural, no access, and also just, I suppose, putting people into homes when in fact the person, you know, when you're going through that rehabilitation, you're in addiction, you might have come out of prison, you're learning everything for the first time. So you then see them come right back into the homeless service all over again. And then people sometimes can't understand, you know, why can't somebody live independently when they've been given a house or an area to live in, and they're back into that cycle again. So I suppose in terms of Peter McVerry, how do you manage that, or how do you break that cycle for people?
Absolutely. I suppose within the context of homeless services, they are very challenging environments, particularly for any individual availing of the service, but particularly challenging for somebody in the early stages of their recovery. So at all times, you know, we are trying to manage the participant group, you know, throughout a continuum of care in our services, and the focus at all times would be that when somebody has completed, you know, their treatment programme, the goal will be to support onward into drug-free accommodation. I suppose the challenge, I suppose, for Peter McVerry Trust, we have 65 drug-free accommodation beds within the Dublin remit. I suppose some of our services would have a national remit, and as such we would be receiving referrals from all over the country. The challenge is that we don't have the ability to place individuals outside of the Dublin area into those aftercare beds, and I suppose it leaves us in a very challenging situation in terms of supporting onward progression. And otherwise, I suppose it's well known that early recovery is a very vulnerable place for any individual, and I suppose in that respect all of our attempts are orientated towards trying to achieve some level of stability. I suppose if we were to think of the wider context, though, in terms of, let's say, outside of the homeless services and into the housing context, we do have an established Housing First programme that obviously operates on a national basis, and it's specifically intended to support individuals with long-term histories of, you know, homelessness, addiction, mental health, you know, overall complexity. And I suppose one thing that I suppose for myself learned very early on in my own career was that, you know, it's really not just about a home for an individual, because a home really only represents four walls. I suppose what we would often find is, and I suppose has informed the programme collectively over the last number of years, is that putting an individual into a home is only, you know, a very small percentage of what the bigger picture actually is. A lot of individuals, albeit the fact, have been sleeping rough in and out of homeless services for a long time. They have also built a community, whether that be on the street or whether that be within homeless services. And when you take somebody out of that, it becomes very isolating. So the likes of the Housing First programme are intended to provide wraparound supports on an in-reach basis into the home, right, you know, looking at all matters in and around management of utility bills, ongoing support in and around isolation, connecting people to their community, because that really is how the picture has to be seen. Recovery obviously is a huge undertaking for any individual, but it's only part of the bigger picture in the long term, and I suppose services have to be equipped to support that individual and be ready and prepared to walk the line with the individual.
Thanks. Thank you, Senator Ryan. Deputy O'Murky, your 5 minutes.
Guramaig of Galair, and apologies a bit earlier. I think I tested my earphones and they didn't work out too well. Anyway, look, it's hardly shocking that some of the terms you talk about are the fact that there are gaps, there's an insufficient capacity, even in relation to TARP. You're talking about you don't have enough available in Mountjoy, and there's nothing in the women's prison at this point in time. And I suppose it was similar enough to what Dr. Garrett McGovern had said to us previously. Even where there is service, it's not always based on what the need is, even what the type of addiction is. And I suppose my answer is, what do we need to actually deliver a decent service? It's almost the same question I ask again. I would ask a follow-up question then also, particularly that the issue of drug debt intimidation was brought up. And while that has to be taken into account, and it's about looking after the family and, you know, the person who's obviously under the cosh, and then always difficult to operate, you know, CRJ or community restorative practice, you know, unless, you know, it takes two to tango and all that, and some of the characters you're trying to deal with aren't great. And I get you can't out-police this, but there is a certain part of policing that needs to happen, as much to secure those who are under pressure, who are, you know, find themselves in these circumstances. So I suppose if we start here and finish at the end.
Yeah, no, just to say, like, if you had a magic wand, ideally,
Exactly.
what TARP would specifically need, I think it's its own building separate, you know, where you could develop, I suppose, a therapeutic community and help them and treat them holistically. You could prepare them a little bit better for reintegration back into the community. More resources, like we're very limited at the moment through space and time, I suppose, to work with the men. We've 8 weeks to work intensively with them, and that is like you're working on addictions, you're also working on the preparation to put them back out into the community. That's why it's vital for a
Many of them that wouldn't have had the supports beforehand, and we could have avoided a lot of this probably anyway.
Yeah, and like it makes sense. I think everything we're talking about here today, we already know. You know, all the research is kind of there. And for me, it's time to just for investment in the quality of work that Merchants Kirwan is providing within the prison. You know, we know, we've spoke about it, all the research is there that 70% of the people are struggling with addictions. Like, let's invest in it.
Yeah,
like,
we're repeating ourselves.
Yeah, let's, like, it's we talk, look, we treat these men in prison, we talk about, we do modules around revolving doors coming in and out of prison, but like when you're looking at it, it's not really their fault if it's the higher level, the policies and procedures that's keeping them coming in as well. Like, let's invest in them, you know. We can't be teaching these men about revolving door, going through addiction, coming back into prison, if we're not willing to change things at the top. So ideally, more space, I take, more time with the men, better investment, but we talked about building super prisons and everything. Let's build a therapeutic community and stop these men from coming into prison. Give them a chance.
Just on that, like, as well, like with regards to the prison overcrowding issue, like, you know, there's over half the population are in there for serving less than 12 months, like, in short sentences, actually do more harm than good, like, you know, especially if you've got accommodation, especially if you've got childcare needs, especially if you've got a job, you know, you lose all them things, you go into prison for 6 weeks, you're not there long enough for a meaningful intervention, and you're thrown back out onto the streets with nowhere to go, and then you're on to the services and all this type of stuff. Very, very expensive practice. I see there was tagging and all that kind of stuff brought in, and there's over 1,000 people on remand. Do you know how many of them people could be on tag in the community? With the tagging person, whoever gets the gig or whoever's got the gig, what social considerations did they build into the tendering process?
Yeah.
Do you know what supports are around that? What, like, mentoring services are around that with the people that are tagged waiting to be sentenced? What would it change if they were there? I suppose with regards to kind of the prison capacity, building more prisons, like, you know, it makes no sense. If you made those changes, reduce short sentences, nobody goes to prison for less than 12 months, and if they are on that way, they go on to like a TOOS program or a CE scheme or something of that description, and if they don't show up and if they don't try, then they go to prison, you know. There's alternatives. There's many alternatives, and I suppose, yeah, like if it's a prison sentence for less than 12 months, do you know, what worth is it?
No, that's brilliant. All right.
There's 4 seconds left. Do you?
Oh, you know, well, here. Do what you can in 4 seconds.
Yeah, no.
I was going to say, do what you can in 4 seconds and just keep talking. That's what I usually do.
There will be a second round. Thank you, Deputy Workill. Thank you. Senator Fitzpatrick.
Kirlock, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your participation in this public meeting for us. It's hugely helpful. And you've really clearly articulated, I think you described it as the undeniable link between trauma and addiction. I think it's a circle. It's trauma, addiction, crime, and it is that vicious circle, and it goes around and around and around for far too many people. Carl, can I ask you, the treatment and rehabilitation service that you're delivering in Mountjoy, when did that start?
So I'm recently in the role 8 months now, but Niamh might answer that.
Okay, I mean, I don't need a month. I just want a sense of how long has it been in place. I see you've got a review of it, but roughly how long is it in place?
Jason Campbell wrote the programme. Jason Campbell is he not involved in that? He was a big part of that.
One, Niamh?
No.
The programme itself is in existence roughly about 10 years.
Okay.
And it recently underwent an independent evaluation 18 months ago. One of those recommendations was to have a full-time coordinator. So we were able to recruit Carl for that position, and Carl is now tasked with implementing the rest of the recommendations, which is going absolutely amazingly well. We've really upped the game in terms of the standards in the programme, and we're seeing the benefits of that.
That's great, and congratulations, Carl. Well done on your appointment. Really depressing to think 10 years and 0 places for women.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I can't tell you. Makes my blood boil. Just makes my blood boil. So that's completely unacceptable. The recommendations, Carl, can you share with us what some of those recommendations are? Because to my mind, what you have all described is very clearly that there is 70% of the prison population is in some form of addiction. 1,200 of them are officially on the waiting list for some sort of treatment. You call for a dedicated space. Which prison should we just dedicate, Carl? Like, seriously, which prison should just be dedicated? Because it's a whole culture change that's required here. You've got a whole distinct population, easily identifiable, no mystery who we're trying to target here, or how we could go about targeting them. Carl, what are the recommendations? Yeah. And I don't need you to give us, we'll take this up with the Prison Service, the Department of Justice, and I guess the Probation Service as well, we should get involved. But we'll be looking at those in another session. But can you talk about the programme? Yeah. Just what recommendations would you prioritise? And that could be mainstreamed. Yeah. I mean, across the board, not just specialised people like you, but the whole prison staff, I think, need to be upskilled, it sounds like.
And that is one of the recommendations. I suppose the biggest one is the expansion of TARP and to go to the women's prison and probably an open prison. So 2 other sites would be perfect. I think the IPS, and the conversations have already started. The IPS have been very accommodating. We've already been talking to the governors up in Wheatfield. But ideally I would love to get a chance at running a therapeutic community within an open prison. Some of the other recommendations will be like the continuum of care for the men, care plans, make sure that the progress is tracked through it. I suppose what you said there, like training some of the prison staff within to have them have trauma-informed care, have the trauma-informed lenses on when they're dealing with some of the men. Any big ones I'm kind of missing?
I think improving the standards and the quality was the big one, which we've done, and then expansion after that, as Carol said, to accommodate women. Just to clarify, there are addiction counsellors in the women prisons, so there is one-to-one.
There's just not the intensive programme.
They just don't have access to the programmes, exactly. So we need multiple programmes in multiple sites, or else, as Carol said, one big residential facility for people to access treatment.
Damien, I'm going to come to you for 1 second because I see you indicating, but can I just ask you one simple question? Yep. Yes or no? Do the participants have to be abstinence to get on the programme?
Yes.
They have to achieve that first in the prison environment?
Well, they will be supported through the support of the counsellors within the prison. So if they get referred to TARP, we will link in with them. We will look at the criteria. They have to be what we call P19 free, is good behaviour. They have to start willing to detox. And we're working close with the medics up there as well. At the moment, we have the medical unit, and a plan at the moment is 2 floors, so we could have like a conveyor belt going from stabilisation onto 1 floor up onto preparation to go into TARP on the 2nd floor, and then the other landing is where they will engage in the programme.
Okay, Gurmagat, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Fitzpatrick. Okay, it's fine, you're exactly on time. Deputy Graves.
So I want to thank you all for coming here today. It's really useful to the work that we're doing for the committee. We're limited on time, so I'll just jump to the questions. I'll start with Stephanie and from Peter McVerry, if you don't mind. Just to say, like, 100% agree with you on the multi-annual funding, and that's something that's been raised by all of the services that we've met with and that I deal with on a regular basis. I mean, people can't plan ahead if they don't know what money they're going to do. So very fair point, and I do agree with you. Just in terms of the services and the rollout to rural areas. And we do know that, you know, that the drug problem has exploded right around the country. It's in every village, every town, etc. I'd really like to know how you would see that being managed without the resources that are currently allocated to the bigger cities and the areas that have been ravaged for, you know, years and years and years, without taking money away from them, how you would see the rural village and towns and like smaller cities, if you like, around the country. We do need a service. So I'm just wondering how you'd see that being handled.
I suppose what I would feel would be important, and I suppose I speak outside of the Dublin area because we are very fortunate in terms of what we do have accessible to us. I suppose what I would see as working quite well would be maybe a pooling of funding or a pooling of resource by regional area, because what that is doing is it's actually providing opportunity for individuals outside of Dublin for access to services as and when are needed, and perhaps maybe agreements to be made between, you know, the local authorities in each of the regional areas alongside the HSE, because obviously it needs to be looked at from a health point of view, so investment from the HSE would be required. But I feel if we were to tackle it initially on a regional, like a region by region basis, that, you know, the services have the ability to reach the individuals that aren't fortunate enough to actually receive it in the current situation.
Yeah. Okay, this is just, you know, we have examples of people that are actually travelling to Dublin and then they end up worse off because they're in a homeless situation, but they don't have any access to facilities where they currently live. But
add to that there.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So, like, say for instance, if somebody's on a script or something up in Dublin and you're trying to get it transferred to Cork or vice versa, you know, that's so problematic. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I'd be a big advocate now for balanced regional development. I suppose in my earlier years, I relocated to Galway. Nothing there. One website. Everything was in Dublin and everything was in Cork. Unfortunately, the problem that I had gone to prison for is in every town and village in Ireland. Like, so I think like there's a split up of about 6 different areas now, and I think it needs to be really, really looked at how we can uniformly distribute the resources, because there's a lot of existing services already in Dublin. There isn't a huge amount of need to keep pumping money in there. Spread it out a bit is probably the best answer to that question, so that all of the areas in Ireland that face the same problems have the same supports.
Yeah, look, I agree with you to a certain extent, you know, but Dublin, as we know, is everywhere you go. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
Ballymun
Ballymun has 180 services in it.
Yeah.
180 services, and the problems are still the same. Like, what are they all doing? Do you know, that really needs to be looked at. If the problems remain when there's 180 concentrated services in one pocket of area, I mean, what are they at like?
But the numbers are growing and growing exponentially all the time. I mean, even I live in an urban area, and like that, there was a small service, but they're swamped. Like, they can't deal with the, you know, with the needs, you know. So it's an escalating problem.
Just to say, Ballymun is a very nice place now, by the
Yeah,
way, as well. But
and I agree with you. It is, but I don't think it serves to take funding away from areas that needed to invest in other areas. It's more about increasing the funding and making sure that everybody is looked after, rather than taking away from people that have a need and have had a need for years, I suppose. Merchants Quay. So I've been to visit your facilities and whatever. I haven't been into the prison yet, but we'll be doing that. What I'd like to know is, because I think it's a really engaging programme that you're talking about. I would like to know why not the women. Do you know, is it about space and is it about facilities? Is it about the lack of will within the prison, or why has it not happened in 10 years? Why is your services not available? And
sorry, we're over
all the time.
I might let Niamh answer that briefly if you can.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a lack of will from the women. It's definitely not from a lack of will from the Irish Prison Service either. Everybody agrees that it needs to happen. It is an issue of space and capacity. There's not enough one-to-one rooms, never mind group rooms, never mind what Carol described as that sterile landing that's secure and segregated from the rest of the prison. The people on TARP have screened visits, so there is actually zero chance of getting access to drugs on that secure landing, which is what we need to replicate in all prisons, or, as we keep saying, having one dedicated facility to deliver that programme for men and for women.
Thank you, Niamh, and thank you, Deputy Grouse. Senator Niquillen.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you all coming in, and it's going to be a long question, and I'm sorry, but it's just in terms of context, I'd like to get an idea of what is like for you on the ground, because you seem to be almost picking up the pieces for what's happening somewhere else in the prison service and how people are not getting access to some of the treatments that they need. So going back, like in 1999, there was an expert group to review the structures and organisation of the prison healthcare services. It was recommended that a postgraduate diploma in prison nursing be established, and I don't think it was. In 2003, 22 years ago, the IPS carried out a needs assessment in conjunction with the Health Board of Healthcare and the IPS. Again, nurses identified the need for more training and that misuse specialist nurses should be appointed in all prisons. 16 years ago, 2009, there was the IPS then published a working together to meet the healthcare needs of prisoners, and again it looked at the previous need for addiction nurses. 10 years ago in 2016, we had the review of drug and alcohol treatment services for adult offenders in prison, again talked about coordination and the need for planning for offenders with addiction issues, and planning for addiction nurses didn't happen. 2002, the Crow report was published, again talked about consultation, the role of specialist addiction nurses, and it recommended that be examined. And then in September 2024, in a reply to a PQ about how many full-time addiction nurses were employed in the IPS, the answer was that there were none. So that's 25 years, and I'm wondering what the impact of all of that has had on the ground when people come out from being in prison with addiction, and obviously, you know, you're saying they have to be in abstinence to qualify for TARP. So what is the impact of all of those, I would call them failings, and, you know, balls being dropped within the prison service when people are out? Damien, you might be best placed to answer. Thank you.
And coming in on that, I suppose, like, prison have to take in the people that are sent there, and I suppose a lot of responsibility is being placed at their door. I think the judiciary is where we really need to look at first, you know. Like, it shouldn't be an automatic response to send somebody straight to prison and nothing else considered. I'll give you an example. Like, I was in court with a couple of people who had done an awful lot of work on themselves, violence reduction, travel mediation, 3 years on waiting for this case to come up. All this work, had jobs, didn't give it a second thought, give them a headline sentence and sent them into prison. You know, so they were doing a lot of work in the community, they were on the right track, they still got sent to prison. I think that's where the problem really needs to look at first. You know, why is prison the first choice? What are the alternatives? With regards to the prison service, I do an awful lot of work with them, and they do try their best to bring in programs. Like, we have people going in for Mental Health Week, we have personal development, we have life skills, motivational speaking. We were actually doing workshops around coping with bereavement, because some people don't get out of prison and that's an acute problem. But there's over 3,000 people on waiting lists in a broken system that is heavily overpopulated. The women's is acutely overpopulated, and they have no open prison. You know, it's actually, the women's prisons are far worse than the male prisons. So the prison service is in crisis mode, and it needs investment. It needs to take a lot of the people that are doing short sentences, a lot of people that are on remand, take them out of the system as best you can, and make it a space for rehabilitation. That way then they will not need to build more prisons, and they will not need that type of investment, which will require staffing and all the rest of it at 99,000 per year per average. So start at the judiciary. Get them to start really considering alternatives to prison, and then maybe the prison might be able to respond and do the appropriate, offer the appropriate support you've described.
Carol, your role is as a coordinator. Sorry, Niamh, you can come in as well. It's your role as a coordinator. Does that mean that you are working clinically on the ground, or is it more that you're coordinating clinicians?
Yeah, more coordinating the programme at the moment, but we are building a relationship clinically on the ground. I think it's actually shocking when there's no addiction nurses within the prisons, you know, and it's something that I suppose that I've spoken to them as well, and they're well aware of it as well, the nurses themselves, that they would gladly welcome some training in that. I suppose my role at the moment is coordinating, it's developing, it's implementing the programme, so I'm focused on the programme at the moment, but long term we would be looking towards, I suppose, we are dealing with the nurses on the ground at the moment. They're fairly under-resourced within the prison as well.
Yeah. Would you have a view on that, Neith, about addiction nurses?
I was going to say that there are addiction-specific nurses in the prisons, but they are not ring-fenced roles, so they are often redeployed for, like, you know, injury management, other duties that are considered more a priority on any given day, where they are in position and they are able to screen people on committal and they are able to support people in relation to their detox and their medication in order to access programmes like TARP. It works extremely well.
But how many of those are there?
Addiction-specific nurses existing in the prison. I don't know how many there are exactly, but I know that in 2 prisons in particular, they really do prioritise them staying in that role where they are meeting and triaging people on committal in terms of their addiction needs. And where that happens, it really strengthens the outcomes for those people and helps them to get to services like Merchants Quay.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to actually request that we ask how many addiction nurses are in the prison service.
Okay.
As a committee. Thanks.
Request. Yeah, we will make that request.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kirwan.
Thank you, and thank you all for your presentations. I think it's a huge discussion. So I just want to, I suppose, touch a couple of points before I ask a question. So I suppose that, like, I think just as we don't want to create competition between our peers in terms of recovery, we probably should also be careful not to play into the state's hands by doing that in terms of communities. So, like, if we look at, say, Ballymun and the concentration of harm there, we also have to remember that we, like was said by Deputy Greaves, it's about making sure that everywhere has access and everywhere has funding, not that funding is moved from a particular place to another place. Because if we go back, Damien, to your earlier comments around the poverty index and understanding that some communities have certain capital, so whether a certain community experiences drug use or not, there may be certain capital within that community. So we see a lot of conversation now where it says, like, there's drug use in every community. And I think that can be harmful in many ways, because we're not caveating that way that the stigma, shame, imprisonment and the amount of people in graveyards don't exist and the harms don't exist across those communities in the same ways. So that as long as we keep centring the poverty piece like you have, Damien, but then maybe not draw comparisons between certain communities that may have money and don't, because we could end up then really disadvantaging those communities when we look at budget spends. But obviously services need to be improved and be agile and be resourced to do so. But just before you come in relation to rehabilitation and that revolving door piece, and we keep talking about individuals and what they need and, you know, the trauma and when actually we can see it's society that keeps failing. It's society that keeps failing communities. It's you know, if an individual keeps getting to a place of wellness, there's only a certain amount of power one has within one's own agency. When you go back out institutionally into institutional abuse, in terms of poverty and systematic violence that has happened over generations and generations, trying to take your personal agency and will and recovery into that system is extremely, extremely difficult. And I think that's why we need to potentially look back on the state and the state failures to support communities rather than individual people not being able to, I suppose, uphold their own recovery. And I'm wondering, Carl, if you can maybe talk a little bit about how people who have completed your programme are actually doing now in terms of their recovery, but also how important recovery is as part of a continuum of care rather than its separate standalone thing. If that makes sense, because I think there's lots of dialogue around recovery, but we're not caveating that with recovery as part of a continuum of care sometimes, and that recovery is not like a mecca in terms of abstinence, but that there's all different types of recovery. And I'm wondering how well and what people who have engaged in TARP are doing now in terms of their recovery, because they may have to obviously go back into either their own communities where there's a huge amount of harm, or else within the prison system where there's a huge amount of harm.
Yeah. I suppose from one example kind of sticks out to me from the last cycle, and just to highlight as well, I suppose, the importance of building a safe environment. You know, in the men's own terms, they call it the hotel part of Mountjoy because it's more relaxed. They get their own food to cook and stuff. And we had this one guy in there the last, and he grew up in care. You know, he grew up, he's traumatised, he's no parents. He'd one sister that wouldn't speak to him, and the guilt and the shame, he never spoke to her. And while he was on the programme, he got to speak to her. And when he's 18, the services are kind of gone. And when he's sat in group, he's like, I never thought I'd trust anyone again. You know, in and out of prison, all his life, 4-year sentence, 5-year sentence, in addiction. And he said, I never thought I'd trust anybody again, you know. And I suppose his continuity of care was that we got him into recovery housing. We don't teach them. They need to empower themselves within their own recovery. They need to find what works for them, wherever it be, whether it be linking in with service, a counsellor, 12-step fellowship, wherever. And we got him into recovery housing, and he's on TR at the moment. But like, even checking up on him is like he's doing more than what he should be doing. You know, so he was given that opportunity to trust people again and believe that in humanitarian. You know,
and I think that's the stuff we're forgetting when we discuss people, is that sometimes trust or those other human things, they can't be measured. And often states and systems will measure outcomes very rigidly, when trust, that individual's ability to trust again, will never be measured when we look at how we provide services from a financial perspective, or even from a theoretical perspective.
Yeah.
I just wanted to come in on the record there. I wasn't criticising the fact that Ballymun had all them services. I just wish there was that many services where I come from. That was my point.
I just wanted to
it's a nice place, and I have a lot of friends there. That's how I just know about the place. But like, with regards to the trust piece, I suppose that's where we all come from. Like, you know, there's that authenticity. You know, like, people dip in and dip out of particular ebbs and flows of their life. But we'll always be there for them. Like, there's an open door, and we do it from a place, a good place, you know, because it matters. Like, when you walk the walk, you know the crack, and you try your best, and you never try to let anybody down. And I suppose that's what we offer. So going back to my earlier point.
Just a little bit over, if that's okay. But use more time shortly. So we've gone through all the members of my questions now, if that's okay. Niamh, we had a presentation at a different committee, the Justice Committee, from the Director of Prisons a couple of months ago. It was probably one of the most stark presentations I've heard during my time in the Oireachtas. He talked about conditions in the prison systems that, I think it's my words, not his, were tantamount to torture in many ways. Obviously, deprivation of liberty is taken for granted, but then overcrowding, inability to access treatments, inhumane conditions. In its current form, if a person goes into a prison service with a trauma, an addiction, or even without one, are they more likely to encounter rehabilitation, recovery options, or are they more likely to have an addiction compounded?
I think they're more likely to have an addiction issue compounded unless they get access to services while in prison. Given what you've already heard in relation to short sentences, often people who are given a custodial sentence directly related to offending behaviour, directly related to their addiction, they are often short sentences. And those are the people that don't often get the access because of the long waiting list. If you think of 1,200 people waiting for treatment, if you're doing a short sentence, the chances are you're not going to get to see anybody. For that reason, we are piloting having project workers in prison. We have one working really effectively in Clover Hill at the moment because that's a remand prison. So she is actively facilitating groups that people can drop into to get information about supports, information about how to keep themselves safe, relapse prevention, overdose prevention, and also information on services in their community should they happen to go to court one day and be released which often happens. So we're trying to get brief intervention, signposting information to as many people as we possibly can, including naloxone training as well, and making people aware that they can take naloxone with them when they leave. But it's very much a firefighting situation. But due to the success of that in Clover Hill, we have actually been given a budget to employ a further 5 project workers to have in different prisons around the country for that exact same reason. So if they can access services, I believe they can. An intervention can be very effective in terms of supporting them to access further services or stop offending. Where they don't, I think a negative experience in prison can further compound trauma and also deepen the roots of addiction.
Yeah, which is probably also borne out by our recidivism rates, which are close to 7 out of 10 people who come out of prisons will reoffend within 3 years. It's difficult to see how they wouldn't, given the absence of rehabilitation options. Stephanie and Noelle, if I could ask you about drug-related intimidation that you referenced in your report, could you tell us about the supports that are available to people in your service or avail of your services who are experiencing drug-related intimidation?
Yeah, I suppose we've seen a significant increase probably over the last maybe 12, 15 months across the variety of our services. And I suppose a lot of families are struggling in terms of paying debt, while the individual's trying to access service. In terms of the support that's directly available to the individual, I'm going to be honest, it's very limited. I suppose the point that I would have touched on was that we have seen positive strides in certain pockets of the capital, whereby we've seen community policing and support from community policing working very well in terms of people feeling, somewhat more supported and increased presence and otherwise. But in terms of the actual debt itself, the debt is not going away. And I suppose in terms of our ability to, interrupt that process, it's very, very limited. And I suppose we really would like to be in a position to see some change in and around addressing those matters.
Does it exist at all?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay. Not that I'm aware of. I certainly know the impact that it's having on families. I know families that have remortgaged homes. I know families that have sold personal belongings, cars, otherwise homes under threat. All of those other matters, it's a variation in terms of the amount varying from 500 to 25,000. So I suppose it's very impactful, and albeit the fact that the individual wants to turn their life around, I have also seen people exit the programme prematurely because of the sheer anxiety related to the impact on either their community or their home and often directly their family. So I suppose one thing can't change without the other, but in order to actually see a positive change, we would need to see a systematic change in terms of how we actually address that issue, because there's no secret to the fact, that we're seeing these elements in the media in terms of drug use.
Very quickly, what would you like to see happen in terms of plain thing? Given how insidious drug-related intimidation is both to the individual and community, what suggestion would you have?
I suppose the closest thing that I can imagine would be some form of a resolution would actually require buy-in from the individual and equally those that are actually selling drugs. And I suppose the closest thing I could link it to would be some element of a restorative justice process. I suppose up in the north of Ireland historically they would have actually used mechanisms in and around certain issues that would arose. And they would have obviously facilitated, meetings in and around progressive ways of actually moving forward that didn't necessarily impact, on somebody's family or somebody actually losing their life. Okay. So I suppose something to that effect.
Thank you, Noelle. Members, we have 14 minutes until we're scheduled to have our private session. So that's not going to give enough time for any sort of comprehensive second round. I'm open to yourselves in terms of if anyone has a very, very quick individual question with an answer. Deputy Ruan has put her hand up first, and then I'll come to yourself. Thank you. But we'll do it very quick if that's okay.
Yeah, I've one question. It was mentioned that IPAS was part of your brief in terms of your roles. What I'm wondering is, in relation to those who are in IPAS, and those who obviously have that Peter McVerry are involved in. I know DePaul obviously are involved in some sites. I don't know whether you cross over or they've been divvied up, so apologies. But what I'm wondering is, in terms of substance use and its impact on people within IPAS, do McVerrys provide particular on-site signposts and support to people that may experience addiction issues or substance use, or are they signposted into more centralised services of Peter McVerry? So I'd just love a bit of information on that.
So the way it would work is all of our project workers that would be based across our remit of IPAS hotel provision would have all of the mandatory trainings in and around harm reductions, etc. There is no direct in-house support that's offered. Obviously, we're trying to promote that concept of community and integration as well, but depending on where the hotel is based and otherwise. So obviously the signposting element would definitely take place on site, but all with a view to transitioning into community services.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, look, just to follow on from what you'd asked yourself in relation to the drug debt and intimidation piece, and I suppose even some of those CRJ projects, in an awful lot of cases when it got down to dealing with serious criminals, it ended up being the authorities or whoever needed to deal with it. Like engaging in a restorative practice scenario means you have someone to play along with you, and not all these characters are going to be up for that. So, like we already know, you don't have the services that you want. We talk about homeless services. I remember hearing for years about people saying, like, just you leave people and all they have is time to contemplate in relation to the money that they owe in relation to drug debt. And in some of the cases, I know at times all you could do was literally go to the guards. Not that people were going to literally see it through, but it was the fact that at least they were aware, or you were putting it on their agenda in relation to these were criminals who were actually endangering people and threatening property and people themselves, and then at least maybe some action was taken which might have relieved some of the pressure. Just what would your engagements be in relation to that? Because look, here we all know we want earlier interventions that remove an awful lot of the services that we then need afterwards that are almost nuclear.
I suppose what I would say is I'm certainly not naive to the fact that that would be the answer in its totality, because as I said a couple of moments ago, it does involve buy-in from both parties, and obviously that is not something that's easily achieved. But at a national level, it's something that needs to be looked at, whether that be through individual pilot programmes across different pockets of the country or otherwise. But I suppose my point really is that something needs to change.
We're ignoring it at the minute.
And that's exactly it. And I suppose I'm conscious of the fact that it's big personalities that are involved. There's lots of different dynamics, there's risks, there's all of those other pieces. But the sheer reality of it is that when we look at, the concept of recovery, and we talk about prisons and we talk about all of these things, we can't look at one piece and not look at it all. So if we're talking about trying to support people, whether it be through a continuum of care or over a longer term period, we have to be able to look at all the other matters, in terms of society, drug deaths, all of those other pieces, because the reality of it is that it can be one of the single drivers that actually brings people back to drug use. It's the anxieties, it's the fears, it's the pressures. So I think if we're looking at more sustained outcomes, we need to be able to invest in what actually is going to create that.
Yes, Deputy. Oh, sorry, Deputy Graves.
Yeah, look, I'll be extremely quick. Damien, just because I didn't get a chance to speak to earlier on, none of us think that you want to take money from the people of Malmymon and give it elsewhere. We get it, no, just in fairness. Just in terms of your service, I think the step down programme is great. I think we need more of those. We need places for people to go, having been in prison. But I'm really concerned about the lack of services for women. So I just want to check with you whether you have women in your service, or is it men only?
Men and women, yeah.
Oh, excellent, excellent.
Yeah, and look, there is a kind of in-community prison in Dublin for women, and it's a nicely run centre, and some people are getting employment from that as well. It's not very well known, and it's important from a safety point of view for them. But with regards to just on the first point, like just I suppose suggesting people are labeling them as criminals. I understand that they're engaged in criminal behaviour, but they're still people, and prohibition is pretty much what creates criminality. So we need to look at that to avoid criminal behaviour. And then on the restorative justice piece, there's going to be a rollout of community safety partnerships. They have a role to play with regards to restorative justice. But for the prison step-down stuff that I've mentioned earlier, under the Urban Regeneration Development Funds and Rural Regeneration Development Funds, there's huge opportunities to transform areas that are in pockets of disadvantage. There was talks of 100% funding for areas that are categorised as extremely disadvantaged, and that could be quite transformative. People that are on probation or people that are on community return could get training as part of the regeneration of an area and claim it for themselves. So, like with that, like I think that's possible in the prison. Rather than invest in 15 money for 1,500 new spaces, why not take that approach?
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. With regards to the women's side of things, you know, I do go into the women's from time to time, and they're on top of each other,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? And we're putting people into a room with a load of other people, and we're expecting them to cop on, you know, whatever cop on means. For me, like, you know, I think prison has become a place of warehousing vulnerable people rather than actually addressing their needs and helping them go on and do whatever they need to do to live a fulfilling life. I think that's the approach we need to start taking rather than, I suppose, putting them into a group and giving them a label.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Damien. I'm the Vice Chair and I'm acting at the moment because the Chair had to step out. We are going to finish up, but I did have a question myself, so I'm going to ask you. Just in terms of, Damien, you made a very strong point about you know, trying to get judges not the short-term sentences and this revolving door.
Yeah.
It's characterised, one characteristic of it is short sentences, and to try and get the judiciary to move away from giving short sentences, less than 12 months.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what's your view on if the judiciary were to do that, but the proposal around electronic tagging? And what's your view on, well, what's your view on that? Like using it as an alternative to incarceration. So if an individual was charged with, found guilty, prosecuted, found guilty of a crime that merited a less than 12-month, let's use 12-month for the sake of argument, sentence.
Yeah.
I'm interested in Damien's view, but I'm interested in all of your view on electronic tagging being used as an alternative.
Would a tag really be required for somebody that's doing less than 12 months?
I don't know, is the honest answer.
What I'm proposing is, like, you know, the two schemes and the CE schemes, they're crying out for numbers. You get a bit of a lift when you go out onto a scheme or whatever.
I know the value of those schemes, and I agree with you. I think they're hugely, hugely valuable. Occupational schemes like that, absolutely, and they have to be used. I agree with all of the points that you made. I'm actually specifically interested in the use of electronic tagging and your view on it. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong one. I just would like to know your all view.
Well, the tagging thing, like, is relevant if there's a safety issue, like a real risk, like, you know what I mean? Obviously, it makes sense.
Okay, so you think it should be determined by the profile of maybe the crime that was committed?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
But with regards to the alternatives piece, like, if the judges maybe considered putting somebody out onto a scheme,
absolutely,
in lieu of going to prison, and if they engage with that opportunity, it might change the way they see the world.
Divert them in the first instance.
And it's an incentive then to kind of get out and about, socialise, all that kind of stuff. And it is,
absolutely, yeah. Thank you for your reply. And Noelle?
Yeah, I suppose I don't know if I would be fully in favour with that as the alternative, but I do think that if an opportunity is being provided, that should be on a wider scale. So if there's a recognition that, you know, with the sentence being under a 12-month period, that individual could perhaps be guided towards other alternatives within the community to turn their lives around. I suppose a tag is restrictive and it presents as punitive, and the individual, bearing in mind histories of trauma and otherwise and their experiences of the general judicial system, I'm not sure would have the desired effect. Whereas if it's seen that, you know, there's trust being placed in the individual and opportunity is being afforded, I ultimately feel that better outcomes will be generated for the individual.
Great, thank you. Carl, Niamh?
I wouldn't mind adding there that, you know, while the work continues to decriminalise drug use, to try and decriminalise people who use drugs, and the other work continues, but it's such a large task to address poverty and inequality in some of the areas that were already mentioned today. Those areas are overrepresented in our prison population. I would be in favour of alternatives to custodial sentences, particularly for those shorter sentences that we spoke about. But the alternatives where there's addiction where addiction is an issue, those alternatives should be around treatment and recovery and addressing trauma. I'm not so sure about tags. Yeah, maybe where there's a risk, as Damien said, but something says to me that just may increase the barriers for people, another help and a stigma. I'm not sure about that, but definitely treatment opportunities for people who are there because of addiction has to be. And while that's all being worked on, better access to services in prison is the only other option.
I just add to that as well. I suppose the Act is there to protect children and vulnerable adults from anybody that has the capacity to endanger them. But if you went into mainstream prison and you told everybody that that's how they were going to be viewed, a lot of people would be very upset. They did a lot of things to survive, put clothes on back, put food in their bellies. They don't generally see themselves as a risk to children and vulnerable adults. So with regards to that, I think if people are a risk to children and vulnerable adults, then obviously safety risks have to be put in place. But if they're general population that just did things to survive, that's a different conversation. And it says more about the society rather than the individual themselves. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Chair, am I to wrap up or? Yeah, okay. So on behalf of the Chair and the committee, I just want to thank you sincerely for your contributions here today. They're incredibly valuable to us. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and we will endeavour to take use of the information you've provided, and we'll build on it in our forthcoming sessions and in our report. And if afterwards there's anything additional you want us to consider, just send it in to us. Yeah. Gormagat. Is it agreed that we will suspend the meeting? Yes. Thank you. Agreed.